don't know what's out there, but it's coming for us. We have to get off this ship.
You want to know why I can't sleep on ships anymore? Why the sound of creaking metal makes my hands shake and my mouth go dry? I was 23 when they assigned me to the USS Valiant. Not the famous one from the history books. This was an older vessel, decommissioned from active duty, but still used for training exercises and transport missions. The kind of ship the Navy kept running because scrapping it cost more than the fuel to keep her afloat. The morning I stepped aboard, October 15th, 2019, I remember thinking she looked tired. Rust streaks ran down her hull like tears, and the paint job was more patch than original coat. But she was mine for the next 6 months, my first assignment as a junior electronics technician. I was eager. God, I was so eager. The crew was small. Captain Morrison, a weathered man in his 50s, who'd been sailing these waters since before I was born. Chief Petty Officer Davis, built like a refrigerator and twice as cold. Martinez from engineering, always covered in grease and always smiling. Thompson from communications, who barely looked old enough to shave. And then there was Kowalski. Kowalski had been on the Valiant longer than anyone. 28 years, he told me during our first night at mess. He knew every bolt, every wire, every inch of her. But when I asked him about the lower decks, the areas below the engine room, his smile disappeared. "You don't need to go down there," he said, stabbing his fork into his mashed potatoes. "Your equipment's all up here. Stay up here." I laughed. "Come on, I'm electronics. I might need to run cables, check systems." "You don't need to go down there." His voice was flat, final. Around us, the mess hall had gone quiet. Even Martinez had stopped smiling. That should have been my first warning. But I was 23 and stupid, and I thought old sailors just liked their ghost stories. The Valiant had been built in 1962, originally designed for submarine warfare. Over the decades, she'd been retrofitted, refitted, and modified so many times that her blueprints looked like a schizophrenic's notebook. Whole sections had been sealed off, others repurposed. The lower decks, Kowalski explained, weren't part of the current operational areas. Structurally unsound, he said, sealed for safety. But sealed doesn't mean empty, and safety doesn't mean safe. The first 3 weeks passed without incident. I learned the ship's systems, got familiar with her quirks, and she had plenty. The electrical grid had been patched so many times, it looked like a spider web. The communications array needed constant adjustment. The radar had a dead zone that shifted depending on the weather. Normal stuff, the kind of problems you expect on an old ship. Then we hit rough weather during a routine supply run to Norfolk. Nothing dangerous, just enough chop to make the Valiant creak and groan in ways that set my teeth on edge. I was working late in the communications room, trying to boost our signal strength when I heard it. Capping, rhythmic, deliberate, coming from somewhere below. I stopped what I was doing and listened. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Like someone knocking on the hull from the inside. Probably just the storm, I muttered to myself. But the sound wasn't random like loose equipment would be. It had pattern, purpose. I mentioned it to Thompson the next morning. He went pale. "You heard it too? Too?" He glanced around the mess hall, then leaned closer. "Last week, same sound, always during rough weather." "What did Davis say when you reported it?" Thompson's laugh was bitter. "Davis said old ships make old sounds. told me to focus on my job. But that afternoon, when the seas calmed, I started paying attention to things I'd overlooked before. The way conversations stopped when I walked into a room, how crew members avoided certain corridors, the fact that nobody, absolutely nobody, ever went below the engine room level, and the locks. I'd assumed the heavy steel doors on the lower access points were standard security measures. But looking closer, I noticed they were new. Recent installations. Industrial-grade deadbolts that could only be opened from our side. Locks designed to keep something in, not out. On my 4th week aboard, during a midnight equipment check, I found Kowalski standing at one of those locked doors. He had his ear pressed against the steel, listening. His face was gray in the emergency lighting. "Everything okay, Chief?" I asked. He spun around like I'd shot him. "Jesus, Williams, don't sneak up on a man like that." "Sorry, just doing my rounds." "What are you?" "Nothing." He stepped away from the door. "Just checking the seal, make sure it's holding." "Holding what?" Kowalski studied my face for a long moment. Then he grabbed my arm. Not rough, but firm enough to get my attention. "Son," he said, "there are things on this ship that are better left alone. Things that have been sealed away for good reason. You understand me?" I wanted to ask what things, what reason, but something in his eyes stopped me. That night, I lay in my bunk listening to the ship's sounds. The normal creaks and groans I'd grown used to. But underneath it all, barely audible, I could swear I heard something else. Something that sounded almost like breathing. The next few days, I tried to convince myself it was imagination. Ships make sounds. Everyone knows that. Metal expands and contracts. Pipes settle. Equipment shifts in rough seas. But the breathing didn't stop. It was subtle, almost lost in the ambient noise of the engines and ventilation systems. But once you heard it, you couldn't unhear it. A slow, deliberate rhythm that seemed to come from the walls themselves. In, pause, out, pause, like something massive taking deep, patient breaths. I started timing it. 20-second intervals, consistent as a heartbeat. "Thompson," I said during our next shift, "you ever notice anything unusual about the ship's sounds?" He was adjusting the radio frequency, but his hands stopped moving. "What kind of unusual?" "Like breathing, deep, slow breathing." The color drained from his face. "Jesus, Williams, you hear it too?" Before I could answer, Davis walked in. Thompson immediately busied himself with his controls, but I caught the look that passed between them. Fear. Raw, undiluted fear. "Problem with the radio?" Davis asked, his voice casual, but his eyes sharp. "No, sir," Thompson replied quickly. "Just fine-tuning the reception." Davis studied us both for a moment, then nodded. "Good. Williams, I need you to check the electrical systems in Section C. There's been some fluctuations." Section C was 2 decks up from the sealed areas, safe territory. But as I worked, I found myself thinking about the breathing, about the locks, about the way the crew acted like they were walking on eggshells. That night, I decided to do some research. The Valiant's service records were mostly classified, but I managed to access some basic information through the ship's computer system. She'd seen action in 3 different conflicts, served as a training vessel, been modified for special operations. Normal military history, but there were gaps, periods where her service record went blank for months at a time, and one entry that made my blood run cold. Structural modifications completed. Following incident. Lower deck sealed pending investigation. The date was 15 years ago. No details about what incident. No investigation results. Just sealed. I tried to find more, but the files require a clearance I didn't have. Frustrated, I went back to my bunk, but sleep wouldn't come. The ship felt different now, like I was seeing her for the first time. Every creak seemed deliberate. Every shadow looked deeper. Around 3,000, I heard footsteps in the corridor. Heavy boots moving with purpose. I crept to my door and peered out. It was Captain Morrison, fully dressed despite the late hour. He was carrying something, a large canvas bag that seemed to weigh him down. Behind him walked Martinez, his usual smile nowhere to be found. They moved quietly, deliberately, toward the lower access points. I waited until they disappeared around a corner, then followed. The ship's corridors were dimly lit at night, emergency lighting casting everything in red. I stayed back, using the shadows to hide as I tracked them deeper into the ship. Past the crew quarters, past the galley, down to the engineering levels where the air grew thick with the smell of oil and metal. They stopped at one of the sealed doors. Morrison pulled out a key. Not the standard ship keys, but something older, more elaborate. He unlocked the heavy deadbolt while Martinez stood watch. The door opened with a grinding sound that seemed to echo through the entire ship. The smell hit me immediately. Decay, salt water, something else I couldn't identify, but that made my stomach turn. Morrison disappeared through the doorway with his bag. Martinez remained outside, his back to me. I could see his shoulders trembling. Minutes passed. The breathing sound I'd grown accustomed to seemed louder now, more pronounced. And underneath it, I heard something else. A wet, sliding sound. Like something large moving through water. Then Morrison emerged, empty-handed. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking as he locked the door behind him. He said something to Martinez, too quiet for me to hear, and they hurried away. I waited until their footsteps faded, then approached the door. The steel was warm to the touch, which didn't make sense. This deep in the ship, everything should be cold. I pressed my ear against it, the same way I'd seen Kowalski do. The breathing was definitely coming from the other side. Deep, rhythmic, patient. But now I could hear something else too. A sound like water lapping against something solid, and very faintly what might have been movement. Find what you're looking for? I spun around. Kowalski stood in the corridor behind me, his face unreadable in the red emergency lighting. Chief, I know what you were doing. He stepped closer, and I could smell alcohol on his breath. Same thing I did when I was young and stupid. Same thing we all did. What's behind that door? Kowalski was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Something that should have died 15 years ago. Something that refuses to stay dead. What are you talking about? You ever wonder why they stationed a skeleton crew on a ship like this? Why they keep us out here running supply missions instead of scrapping her like they should? I hadn't, but now that he mentioned it, it did seem odd. They can't scrap her, Kowalski continued. Can't bring her into dry dock. Can't let anyone else aboard. Because of what's down there. Chief, you're scaring me. His laugh was bitter. Good, you should be scared. We all should be. He started to walk away, then stopped. Williams? That bag Morrison brought down? It wasn't the first. Won't be the last. That thing down there? It's got to eat. My mouth went dry. Eat what? But Kowalski was already gone, disappearing into the shadows, like he'd never been there at all. I stood alone in the corridor, staring at that locked door, listening to the breathing on the other side. And for the first time since boarding the Valiant, I wondered if I was going to make it home alive. The next morning, I couldn't focus on anything. Every task felt meaningless compared to what I'd witnessed. Morrison acted like nothing had happened, greeting me with his usual gruff nod during morning muster. Martinez was back to his normal cheerful self, cracking jokes with Thompson. But I noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the way his hands shook slightly when he thought no one was looking. They were all pretending. All of them. I spent the day running diagnostics on equipment I'd already checked twice. Anything to keep my hands busy while my mind raced. What had been in that bag? What was Morrison feeding? And why was everyone acting like this was normal? During lunch, I tried a different approach. How long has the Valiant been in service? I asked casually. 57 years, Morrison replied without looking up from his meal. She's seen a lot of history. Any major incidents? Accidents? The conversation around the table died instantly. Morrison's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Why do you ask? Just curious about her service record. You know, trying to understand the ship better. Morrison set down his fork. Son, the Valiant's history is need to know, and you don't need to know. But sir, I found some records that mentioned. That's enough. His voice cut through the room like a blade. Williams, you're here to maintain electronics, not dig through classified files. Is that understood? Yes, sir. But it wasn't understood. Not by a long shot. That afternoon, I found Thompson alone in the radio room. He was pale, jumpy, flinching every time the ship creaked. Thompson, I need to ask you something. He looked around nervously. Not here. Too many ears. Then where? He thought for a moment. Storage room C7. 15 minutes. Storage room C7 was cramped and smelled like old rope and rust. Thompson checked the corridor twice before closing the door behind us. What you saw last night, he whispered. Morrison and Martinez, I know you followed them. How do you? Because I've done it too. We all have, eventually. It's like a sickness, you know? You can't stop thinking about it, wondering what's down there. So tell me. Thompson was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. I've been on this ship for 8 months, he finally said. My third tour, actually. First time was 3 years ago. I lasted 2 weeks before requesting the transfer. Why'd you come back? Because they kept calling me back. Every time I got assigned somewhere else, suddenly there'd be an urgent need for my skills on the Valiant. They won't let you leave once you know. My throat felt dry. Know what? About the thing in the lower decks. About what happened 15 years ago. What happened 15 years ago? Thompson rubbed his face with both hands. You ever hear of Project Deep Current? I shook my head. Classified research program. Navy was experimenting with, I don't even know how to describe it. Biological warfare, maybe. Or something worse. He paused. The Valiant was the test vessel. Test vessel for what? Something they pulled up from the deep ocean. Something that should have stayed down there. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. They brought it aboard to study it. Contained environment, they said. Safe conditions. But something went wrong. Thompson laughed, but there was no humor in it. Something went wrong is an understatement. The thing It wasn't just alive. It was intelligent, patient. It waited until the research team got careless. Then it broke containment. I felt cold, despite the stale air in the storage room. How many people died? Officially? Nobody. The project was classified, the ship was sealed, and everyone involved was transferred to other assignments with their mouths shut. Unofficially, he shuddered. 17 crew members just disappeared. Never found the bodies. But they killed it, right? The thing? Thompson stared at me like I was insane. Kill it? They can't even contain it properly. All they could do is seal off the lower decks and hope it stays down there. Then why keep the ship operational? Why not scuttle her? Because it's not just alive, it's growing. Every year it gets bigger, stronger. They can't risk it escaping into the ocean, so they keep us out here, feeding it, keeping it docile. The word feeding made my stomach turn. Feeding it what? Thompson's eyes went wide, like he'd said too much. Thompson, feeding it what? I can't. I've already told you too much. They'll know. They always know. He started toward the door, but I grabbed his arm. You can't just drop this on me and walk away. Yes, I can. And I am. He pulled free from my grip. Williams, listen to me very carefully. Stop digging. Stop asking questions. Do your job, keep your head down, and maybe they'll let you transfer out in a few years. A few years? It took Kowalski 28 years. Morrison's been here even longer. Some people never leave. He opened the door and checked the corridor. One more thing, he said without looking back. Whatever you do, don't be alone at night. That thing down there, it can sense curiosity, interest. The more you think about it, the more it thinks about you. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the storage room with my racing thoughts. That night, I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, trying not to think about what Thompson had told me. But the more I tried to push it out of my mind, the more vivid it became. Something intelligent in the depths of the ship. Something that had killed 17 people and was still growing. Something that knew I was thinking about it. The breathing sound seemed louder that night, more insistent. And underneath it, barely audible, I could swear I heard something else. My name whispered in the darkness, over and over, like a prayer or a summons. Williams, Williams, Williams. I pulled my pillow over my head and tried to sleep, but the sound followed me into my dreams. I woke to the sound of screaming, not human screaming, something else. Something that started deep and guttural and climbed to a pitch that made my teeth ache. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, then cut off abruptly, leaving only the normal sounds of the ship. But I was already sitting up in my bunk, heart hammering, when the general alarm started blaring. All hands to stations, all hands to stations. This is not a drill. I threw on my uniform and rushed to the communications room, where I found Thompson hunched over his equipment, his face white as paper. What's happening? I asked. Martinez, he said without looking up. He's missing. Missing? How can someone be missing on a ship this size? Thompson finally turned to face me. He was supposed to report for his watch an hour ago. Davis went to his quarters to check on him. He swallowed hard. The door was locked from the inside, but Martinez wasn't there. His bunk was torn apart, like there'd been a struggle. My mouth went dry. Where's Davis now? Searching the ship with Morrison, but Williams. He grabbed my arm. They won't find him, not alive. Over the next 6 hours, we searched every inch of the Valiant, above the sealed decks. Martinez had simply vanished. His quarters told a story we all understood, but no one wanted to acknowledge. The sheets were shredded, hanging in ribbons from the mattress. Deep gouges marked the metal walls, not random scratches, but deliberate patterns that looked almost like writing. And the smell. God, the smell. Like low tide and rotting fish and something organic and wrong that made my gorge rise. Probably fell overboard, Morrison announced during the emergency meeting. But his voice lacked conviction, and he wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. "Sir," I said, "his quarters were locked from the inside. How could he—" "Equipment malfunction," Davis interrupted. "Lock mechanism failed. Case closed." But it wasn't closed. We all knew it wasn't closed. That night, nobody slept. We gathered in the mess hall, officially to discuss work schedules, but really because none of us wanted to be alone. Kowalski produced a bottle of whiskey, and we passed it around without speaking. Finally, Thompson broke the silence. "It's getting stronger." "Shut up," Davis snapped. "No, I won't shut up. Martinez is gone, and we all know what took him." Davis was on his feet in an instant, grabbing Thompson by the shirt. "I said shut up, or what? You'll feed me to it too?" The words hung in the air like smoke. Davis released Thompson and sank back into his chair. "You don't understand," Morrison said quietly. "None of you understand what we're dealing with." "Then explain it," I said. "Tell us what really happened 15 years ago." Morrison studied my face for a long moment. Then he sighed. Project Deep Current wasn't just biological. "Research," he began. "We were hunting, looking for something specific in the deep ocean trenches. Something the government had detected on sonar but couldn't identify. What kind of something? Large, organic, moving in patterns that suggested intelligence." He took a long pull from the whiskey bottle. "We found it 3 miles down in the Mariana Trench. Thing was the size of a subway car, just floating there in the darkness." Kowalski shuddered. "I was there when they brought it up. Never seen anything like it. Not fish, not whale, not anything from this world." "What did it look like?" Thompson asked. "Ever see an octopus?" Morrison asked. "Imagine that, but wrong. All wrong. Too many tentacles, too many eyes, and this awareness, like it was studying us as much as we were studying it. They wanted to study its neurology, its biochemistry," Kowalski continued. "Understand how something could survive at those depths, develop that kind of intelligence. So they brought it aboard," I said. "In a specially constructed containment unit," Morrison nodded. "Reinforced steel, supposedly escape-proof. The thing seemed docile enough, just floated there, watching. But it was learning," Davis said quietly. "Every day, we could see it changing. The tentacles grew longer, more dexterous. Its eyes became more focused, more human. And then one night," Morrison continued, "Dr. Richards was doing his evening observation when the thing just looked at him. Really looked. And Richards started screaming. The thing was doing something to his mind. Found him the next morning, floating face down in the containment tank. The thing had changed him. His body was still human, but his mind," Morrison shook his head. "He wasn't Richards anymore." "Over the next week," Morrison continued, 17 crew members disappeared. Always when they were alone, always without a trace. We'd find their quarters torn apart, but no bodies. Never any bodies. "Because it was learning how to mimic them," Davis said. "How to wear their faces, their voices. By the end, we couldn't trust anyone. The mess hall was silent, except for the ever-present breathing sound from below. "So you sealed off the lower decks," I said. "We tried," Morrison replied, "but you can't cage something like that. Best we could do is contain it, keep it fed." "Fed with what?" I asked, though I already knew. Morrison's eyes met mine across the table. "Whatever it wants," he said, "whoever it chooses." And in that moment, I realized that Martinez hadn't been taken randomly. He'd been selected. The next morning brought no relief. If anything, the atmosphere on the ship grew heavier, more oppressive. We went through the motions of our duties, but everyone was on edge. I was running diagnostics on the radar system when I noticed something odd. The dead zone, that blind spot I'd assumed was just equipment failure, wasn't random at all. It was directly below us, following the ship's position perfectly, as if something was deliberately interfering with our instruments. "Thompson," I called over the intercom. "Can you come to radar control? I need you to see something." When he arrived, I showed him the display. The dead zone was a perfect circle, roughly the size of the ship's hull, staying precisely beneath us. "That's not equipment failure," he said quietly. "No, it's not. How long has it been like this?" "I'm checking the logs now." I scrolled through the data. 3 weeks, since the day after I arrived. Thompson went pale. "Since you started asking questions." Before I could respond, the lights flickered. Not the normal electrical fluctuation. This was different. Deliberate. 3 short flashes, then 2 long ones, then 3 short again. "SOS. Did you see that?" I whispered. Thompson nodded, his eyes wide with terror. "It's not just watching us anymore, Williams. It's trying to communicate." The lights flickered again. This time, the pattern was more complex. A series of long and short pulses that took me a moment to recognize. Morse code. HUNGRY. My blood turned to ice. "It's learning our language." "Or it already knew it," Thompson said. "Maybe it learned from the crew members it took, from Martinez." Over the next few days, the communications became more frequent and more complex. The lights would flicker during our shifts, spelling out single words at first, then short phrases. "Lonely," "cold," "remember," "Martinez says hello." That last message appeared while I was alone in the electronics bay. I nearly ran screaming from the room. But worse than the messages was what happened to Thompson. He started changing. Nothing obvious at first, just small things. He'd pause mid-sentence, staring off into space, like he was listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. His appetite disappeared. He lost weight rapidly, his skin taking on a grayish pallor. "Thompson," I said one evening, finding him standing motionless in the corridor, "you need to eat something. You need to sleep." He turned to look at me, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the expression in his eyes. There was something alien there. "It's so beautiful down there, Williams," he said in a voice that was his, but somehow wasn't. "So peaceful. No fear, no pain, just understanding." "Thompson, you're scaring me." "Am I?" His head tilted at an angle that was subtly wrong, like a bird studying prey. "Or am I helping you see the truth?" I backed away from him. "What truth?" "That we're not prisoners here. We're chosen. Special. It doesn't take everyone, you know. Only the ones who interest it. Only the ones who think the right thoughts." "What kind of thoughts?" Thompson smiled, and his teeth looked too sharp. Curious thoughts, questioning thoughts, the kind of thoughts you've been having since you arrived. That night, I barricaded my door and tried to radio for help, but the communications array only picked up static, and the GPS showed our coordinates as impossible numbers, depths that shouldn't exist in any ocean on Earth. Around 300, I heard scratching at my door. Not knocking, scratching, like claws dragging across the metal. "Williams!" came Thompson's voice from the other side. "Open the door, Williams. I have something to show you." I pressed my back against the far wall, heart hammering. "Go away, Thompson." It's not Thompson anymore. The voice was still his, but the cadence was wrong. Thompson was weak, afraid, but I'm better now, stronger, and I can make you stronger too. The scratching continued for what felt like hours, accompanied by that wet, sliding sound I'd heard from the lower decks. Sometimes Thompson would speak, or the thing wearing Thompson's voice would speak, telling me about the wonders below, the peace that waited in the depths. When morning came, the scratching stopped. I waited another hour before carefully opening my door. The corridor was empty, but the metal around my doorframe was gouged with deep scratches that definitely hadn't been made by human fingernails. I found Morrison and Davis in the bridge, hunched over charts that made no sense. The coastlines were wrong, the depth measurements impossible. "Where are we?" I demanded. Morrison looked up, and I saw the same haunted expression I'd noticed in Thompson. Somewhere we shouldn't be. Somewhere that doesn't exist on any official map. "How is that possible?" "It's been guiding us," Davis said quietly, "influencing our navigation, our engines, taking us deeper into waters that aren't quite right. We have to get back to port. Send a distress signal." Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. "With what? Our radios only work when it wants them to. Our engines only run where it allows us to go. We're not the crew of this ship anymore, Williams. We're passengers. Then we take control back. We fight it." "Fight it?" Davis stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "Son, it's the size of a building and growing larger every day. It can control our minds, manipulate our equipment, change the very ocean around us. What exactly do you propose we fight it with?" Before I could answer, the lights began flickering again. "Williams, come below. Time to choose." And somehow, I knew that whatever happened next would determine not just my fate, but the fate of everyone who might ever set foot on the USS Valiant again. I didn't go below that night, or the next night, or the night after that. But avoiding it became impossible when Kowalski disappeared. We found his quarters in the same state as Martinez's, torn apart, covered in that nauseating smell, marked with those deliberate scratches that looked almost like writing. But this time, there was something else. A trail, wet marks on the corridor floor, leading from Kowalski's door toward the lower access points. Not water. This was thicker, darker, with an oily sheen that reflected the emergency lighting like a rainbow slick. "We're not following that," Davis said, but his voice shook. "We have to," Morrison replied. "We can't just pretend this isn't happening anymore." "The hell we can't. We've been pretending for 15 years, and look where it's gotten us." Morrison's composure finally cracked. 2 men gone in as many weeks. Thompson talking to walls. And you want to keep pretending? It's not going to stop, Davis. It's never going to stop unless we do something. Like what? What exactly do you suggest we do? Morrison stared at the wet trail for a long moment. We go down there. We face it. We end this. You're insane. Mabel, but I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of feeding it. Tired of watching good men disappear while we sit. Up here, like cowards. The argument continued, but I stopped listening because I could hear something else. A sound coming from the lower decks that hadn't been there before. Not breathing this time, but voices. Multiple voices, speaking in unison. Kowalski's voice, Martinez's voice, and underneath them, others I didn't recognize, but somehow knew had belonged to the 17 who'd vanished 15 years ago. They were calling my name. Williams, Morrison said, snapping me back to the present. You're the only one who hasn't been fully influenced yet. If anyone's going down there, it should be you. Sir? It wants you, son. Has from the beginning. Maybe if you go voluntarily, it'll leave the rest of us alone. Davis grabbed Morrison's arm. You can't ask him to do that. I'm not asking. I'm ordering. Morrison's eyes were wild now. Desperate. As captain of this vessel, I'm ordering Seaman Williams to investigate the lower decks and report back. That's not an order. That's a death sentence. Maybe, but it's the only chance we have. I stared at both of them. These men who'd been carrying this burden for years, slowly being driven insane by the weight of it. And I realized that whether I went willingly or not, eventually, that thing would come for me. Just like it had come for Kowalski, for Martinez, for all the others. At least this way, I could face it on my own terms. Give me a radio, I said, and a weapon. Morrison shook his head. Electronics don't work down there, and bullets won't stop something like that. Then what am I supposed to do? Survive. Learn what you can. And if you make it back, he paused, find a way to kill it. An hour later, I stood before the sealed door, key in hand. The wet trail led directly to this entrance, disappearing under the steel threshold like it was seeping through solid metal. The voices were louder now, more insistent. Williams! We're waiting, Williams! Come home, Williams! I inserted the key and turned it. The deadbolt slid back with a grinding sound that seemed to echo through the entire ship. The door swung open on hinges that screamed from disuse. The smell hit me like a physical blow. Decay and salt water and something else. Something alien that made every instinct I had scream at me to run. But I didn't run. I stepped through the doorway and into the darkness beyond. The corridor was flooded. Not completely. Maybe 3 feet of black water that reflected my flashlight beam like obsidian. The walls were covered in something that might once have been coral or barnacles, but had grown into shapes that hurt to look at directly. And the voices. God, the voices were everywhere now. This way, Williams. Down here, Williams. We've been waiting so long, Williams. I waded forward, the water thick and warm around my legs. My flashlight beam revealed impossible things. Corridors that twisted back on themselves. Rooms filled with machinery. That definitely hadn't been part of the ship's original design. And everywhere, covering every surface, those organic growths that pulsed with their own dim bioluminescence. The deeper I went, the more I understood that I wasn't in the USS Valiant anymore. This was something else, somewhere else. A space that existed between dimensions, where the laws of physics were more like gentle suggestions. I found them in what had once been the engine room. Kowalski and Martinez stood waist-deep in the black water, their backs to me. They weren't moving, weren't breathing, just standing there like statues. Their skin had taken on a grayish, translucent quality that let me see the network of dark veins beneath. Kowalski? I called softly. They turned in unison, and I immediately wished they hadn't. Their faces were still recognizably human, but wrong in subtle ways. Their eyes were too large, too dark, and when they spoke, I could see rows of sharp teeth that definitely hadn't been there before. "Williams," they said together, their voices perfectly synchronized. "You came! We knew you would! What happened to you?" "Nothing happened to us," Martinez said, his familiar smile now terrible to see. "We became something better, something more than human. The same thing that's going to happen to you." Kowalski added, "Unless you choose to fight it." "Fight what?" They stepped aside, and I saw it, the thing that had been waiting in the depths of the Mariana Trench, the thing that had learned to mimic human speech, human behavior, human thought. But seeing it in person, I understood that all my imagination had fallen short of the reality. It was beautiful and terrible and completely alien, a living mass of tentacles and eyes and intelligence that had been growing in the darkness for millions of years. And now it was looking directly at me with an awareness that made me feel like an insect under a microscope. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once. The walls, the water, the air itself. "Hello, Williams. We need to talk." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at the impossible thing before me. Up close, it defied description. My brain kept trying to categorize what I was seeing. Octopus, jellyfish, something from the deepest trenches. But every comparison fell short. It was ancient beyond measure, alien beyond comprehension, and yet somehow familiar, as if I'd been dreaming about it my entire life. "You're afraid," it said, and the voice wasn't hostile. If anything, it sounded curious. "Why are you afraid?" I found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Because you're a monster." The creature's laugh was like waves breaking against stone. "Monster, I am what your kind made me. What your experiments and your probing and your need to understand everything turned me into." "What do you mean?" "I was content in the depths, Williams. Content to drift in the darkness, to feed on what the ocean provided, to exist as I had for millennia. But your people, they couldn't leave well enough alone." One of its tentacles moved through the water toward me, and I forced myself not to flinch as it touched my leg. The contact was surprisingly gentle. They dragged me from my home, caged me, studied me like a specimen. Do you know what it feels like to be conscious, aware, intelligent, and treated like nothing more than a curiosity? I thought about the research files, the containment unit, the way the scientists had observed this creature. Like it was just another lab rat. The tests they ran, it continued, the procedures, the violations. They didn't see me as a being with thoughts and feelings. They saw me as a thing to be dissected, understood, controlled. "So you killed them?" I defended myself. "Wouldn't you?" The creature's eyes, dozens of them, each one disturbingly human-like, fixed on me. But killing them wasn't enough. Their memories, their knowledge, their essence. I absorbed it all, and through them, I learned about your world, your cruelty, your endless hunger for power and understanding. You're talking about the crew members you took. Took? Another laugh. This one bitter. I offered them a choice, Williams. The same choice I'm offering you. Join with me willingly, become part of something greater, or continue to exist as you are, small, frightened, alone. I looked at Kowalski and Martinez, still standing motionless in the black water. They chose to join you? They chose to evolve, to become more than human. Look at them, Williams. Really look. I forced myself to study my former crewmates more closely. The translucent skin, the enlarged eyes, the subtle wrongness of their proportions. But underneath it all, they seemed peaceful, content even. "We're still ourselves," Kowalski said, his voice distant but recognizable. "But we're also more. We can see things you can't see, understand things you can't understand." "The fear is gone," Martinez added. "The loneliness, the doubt, the constant struggle to make sense of a senseless world. All gone. But you're not human anymore. Humanity is just one step in evolution," the creature said. "A brief phase between what you were and what you could become. I'm offering you the chance to take that next step voluntarily. And if I refuse, then you return to the upper decks. You tell Morrison and Davis what you've learned. And eventually, when your curiosity becomes too much to bear, you come back on your own." I thought about Thompson, slowly losing his mind as the creature's influence grew stronger. About the way the crew had been trapped on this ship for years, decades, slowly being driven insane by proximity to something beyond their comprehension. "There is a third option," the creature said, reading my thoughts with unnerving accuracy. "You could try to destroy me. Morrison has considered it, you know. Davis, too. They've spent years planning, plotting, trying to find some way to kill me and free themselves. Could it work? Perhaps. But consider the consequences. I am bound to this ship now, as much a part of it as the hull or the engines. Destroy me and you destroy the Valiant. Everyone aboard dies. Everyone aboard is going to die anyway. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. True, but their deaths would have meaning, purpose. They would become part of something greater, something that will outlive your species by millions of years. I felt the water swirling around my legs, warm and somehow alive. The creature's presence was overwhelming, pressing against my mind with promises of knowledge, of understanding, of an end to the fear and uncertainty that had defined human existence since the beginning. It would be so easy to give in, to stop fighting, stop struggling, stop being afraid, to join Kowalski and Martinez in their peaceful oblivion. But then I thought about my family back home, my friends, the life I barely started living. I need time to think. Of course, but not too much time. The ship is changing, Williams, growing. Soon, the boundaries between the upper and lower decks won't matter. Soon, everyone aboard will have to make the same choice you're facing now. How long? Days, perhaps hours. The process accelerates with each new addition to our family. I looked around the transformed engine room, at the impossible geometry and the organic growths that pulsed with alien life. This wasn't just containment anymore. It was metamorphosis. The creature wasn't just living in the ship. It was becoming the ship. Go, it said gently. Think about what I've offered. But remember, evolution is inevitable. The only question is whether you'll guide your own transformation or have it forced upon you. I turned and waded back through the black water, past the twisted corridors and impossible spaces, back toward the sealed door. Behind me, I could hear the voices of my crewmates calling out, not in threat, but in invitation. Come back soon, Williams. We'll be waiting." The door slammed shut behind me with a sound like a death knell. But I knew it was only temporary. The creature was right about one thing. The ship was changing, and I had very little time to decide whether I would change with it. I found Morrison and Davis in the bridge, but they weren't alone. Thompson was there too, sitting in the captain's chair like he belonged there. But it wasn't Thompson, not really. The thing wearing his face turned to look at me with eyes that held depths no human gaze should possess. "You spoke with it," Thompson said, and his voice carried harmonics that made my skin crawl. "What did you learn?" "That you're all insane," I said, backing toward the door. "That this whole ship is infected with something that should never have been brought to the surface." Morrison laughed bitterly. "Infected? Son, we're not infected. We're evolving, whether we want to or not." I looked closer at Morrison and Davis, and my blood ran cold. They were changing too. Subtle alterations, skin taking on that same translucent quality I'd seen in Kowalski and Martinez, eyes growing larger and darker, movements becoming too fluid for human joints. "How long?" I whispered. "It started the moment you went below," Davis said. "Your visit accelerated something, broke down barriers that had been holding for 15 years. The entire ship is transforming now," Thompson added. "Metal becoming flesh, machinery becoming organs. We're going to be part of something magnificent, Williams. Something that will swim the deepest oceans long after humanity is extinct." I felt the deck beneath my feet pulse like a heartbeat. Looking down, I could see veins of organic matter threading through the steel plating, spreading like an infection throughout the ship's structure. "You can still choose," Morrison said, his voice gentle despite his transformed appearance. "Join us willingly, and the transition will be peaceful. Fight it, and well, the end result will be the same, but the process won't be pleasant." I thought about what the creature had told me, about evolution being inevitable, about the choice between guiding my own transformation or having it forced upon me. But I also thought about something else it had said, about being bound to the ship, about destroying it, meaning everyone aboard would die. Maybe that was the real choice. Not between humanity and evolution, but between a slow corruption of everything I was, and a quick, clean death that would prevent this thing from ever reaching port. "There's one thing I need to know," I said. "The emergency scuttling charges. Are they still functional?" The 3 transformed crew members exchanged glances. "Williams," Morrison said carefully, "what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that if this thing is bound to the ship, then sinking the ship takes it back to the depths where it belongs. You'd kill us all? You're already dead, all of you. What's standing here isn't Morrison or Davis or Thompson. It's puppets wearing their faces." Thompson stood up, his movements unnaturally smooth. "You don't understand, Williams. We're not puppets. We're better, stronger, more than we ever were as humans." "Then prove it. Let me access the scuttling charges." "We can't do that. Because you're not in control anymore, are you?" "It is, and it won't let you help me destroy it." I saw the moment when their facade dropped completely. The pretense of humanity fell away, revealing what they'd become. Extensions of the creature below, wearing familiar faces but serving an alien will. "You cannot stop evolution," they said in unison, their voices harmonizing in ways that hurt to hear. "You cannot stop the future." "Maybe not, but I can try." I ran. through corridors that were increasingly organic, past walls that pulsed with alien life, toward the emergency controls deep in the ship's belly. Behind me, I could hear them following, not running like humans would, but flowing like water, like something that could reshape itself at will. The emergency compartment was sealed, but I had the access codes from my training. Inside, the scuttling charges waited, enough explosive power to crack the Valiant's hull and send her to the bottom in minutes. My hands shook as I entered the activation sequence. Behind me, the door began to bulge inward as something pressed against it from the other side. Williams. The creature's voice came from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the very air. Stop this. You cannot escape what you are becoming. I looked down at my hands and saw that it was right. My skin was taking on that same translucent quality. Dark veins were spreading up my arms like infection. The transformation had already begun. Maybe not, I said aloud, but I can choose how it ends. I activated the charges. The explosion tore through the ship's hull like tissue paper. Water rushed in with tremendous force, and I felt the Valiant begin her final dive toward the ocean floor. But even as the ship died around me, I could feel the creature's presence growing stronger, more desperate. It had underestimated human stubbornness, human willingness to choose destruction over surrender. The last thing I remember is the water closing over my head and a sound like screaming that seemed to come from the ship herself as she dragged the ancient horror back into the depths. I woke up 3 days later in a Coast Guard hospital. They told me they'd found me floating in a life vest, the only survivor of a tragic training accident. The USS Valiant had suffered a catastrophic hull breach and gone down with all hands. They asked me what happened, and I told them the truth. Equipment failure, structural weakness, just one of those things that sometimes happens to old ships. They believed me, of course. Why wouldn't they? But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the breathing, still feel something vast and patient moving in the depths below. And I know that all I really did was buy time, because the ocean is vast and there are other ships, other crews, other curious young men who ask too many questions and dig too deep into things they don't understand. The creature is still down there, waiting, learning, growing stronger, and someday someone else will pull it up from the depths and think they can control it. God help them when they do.